we tend to fiddle way too much on them and go back after we've done something and overwork them. So there's all kinds of issues with doing skies, and that's what we're going to try to do. Welcome back, everyone, to our January exercises. Today we're going to be painting blue skies with clouds that are probably the hardest, but I'm going to try to give you some tips on how to simplify these clouds. This is our reference photo, and what I've done with the reference photo is I broke it down into big shapes. So this one here we could consider one shape, but I've kind of made it into two because I want this part here to show through a bit. It's important to note that the clouds that are closer to you are overlapping the clouds that are further away. If this one is a cloud on its own, it is overlapping this cloud that's underneath it when we're defining these shapes, and that's why I did this shape the way that I did. Papa bear, mama bear, and baby bear. And then since there's nothing at all over on this side, I decided that I would add some wisp of a cloud, or we'll figure out what might go there well. Tip number one is to simplify the shape. Tip number two is do a value study of the clouds, and then you can see where they are and where are the brightest spots. And then you can decide, well, which part of the cloud do I want to be my focal point? This one is nice and bright, it could be, but it's right in the middle. But depending on our configuration, you know, maybe we just move that over a little bit, or maybe we make one of these nice and bright because these are closest to us, just to kind of accommodate the rule of thirds, if you like. That is our strategy for today. We're not going to worry so much about the land mass. We're just going to... The other thing I wanted to show you was, let me just grab my iPad, an app on my iPad called Grid Painter. What it does, allows me to see the photo in a grid, in case you want to draw it. Says it shows it in what's called a no-tan, and it's simply black and white. Now I can see where the whitest whites are in my painting. And the other thing you can do is you can put that on multiple levels, which is a grayscale no-tan. These are really the whitest parts, and then can level that up to 4 levels, multiple levels, 7 levels, whatever levels I want to get to. Me understand where the lightest lights and darkest darks are in my photo. And in class, what I did is I printed out the no-tan for that so that you can see where those whitest whites happen to be. All right, so we're going to move on to this one, and it's a bit more complex. But the good news is you've got a nice big mass of blue here. You've got masses of blue there. A lot of this blue that's in the horizon looks a lot like this, but we are going to subdue that. And the best way to kind of break it down is to break it down into shapes. So here I've identified one big shape. Let's call this Papa Bear. And then this shape here, along the line here, is Mama Bear. And then we have Baby Bear out over here. And maybe for balance, we might do a little bit of a cloud up there as well. But that's one way to break it down. And of course, there's the no-tan for that. Okay, so if your paper started to warp, there's two things to do. Number one is to just pick it up and stretch it a bit. And then the other thing is to take a flat brush, a nice big flat brush, make sure it's getting dry, and just really push it into the board. If you've got a wrinkle that's going this way, as an example, you can push it like that. Just make sure it's really been pressed into the board. And while I'm at it, I'm just going to add another little coat of water. So I might have taken some off while I was there. Okay, so first step is to identify where our clouds are. We know where they are from the reference photo. And what I want to make sure I do is I put that yellow. I still want these white edges to be the white of the paper, but I just want a bit of yellow there so that it kind of warms it up, and it also tells me where the clouds will be. And by yellow, I mean the Jaune Brilliant, Naples Yellow, or even a little tiny bit of burnt sienna. So I'm just putting this on in the spots where I think the cloud would be highlighted in yellow. Okay, so those are the two, and then there's this one that goes way across here and goes up. We're going to put some cloud coming down in here, so I'm going to put that in, and it's kind of a guideline for me of where my clouds are going to be, so that I don't get lost. Okay, now it's probably hard for you to see there, but so I'm going to go a little bit darker. It's safe to go dark at this point because when we do the blue sky, we'll probably leave some room for the whiter parts of the clouds. Okay, so I did this part, and actually this I did not do quite correct. Oh, it does go that way. Okay, it goes up and then it goes up again. So there's just the bases of that. And now I'm going to take that mixture and I'm going to add just a tiny bit of my Imperial Purple, some lavender. So it's going to be a little bit darker, but it's also starting to clear, get a bit cooler, I meant to say. So I'm going to put this on now, and it's going to identify the dark parts of the clouds. Okay, wherever I see that. And into this one, and at this point I'm not worried about mimicking the exact shape. I'm just trying to identify where the dark parts, the darker parts in the clouds might be. Now this one's interesting because it has this nice white one here, and then it has a variety of darks at the bottom. Okay. And then I'm going to go along and I try and identify this one, which seems more like stripes in a lot of the cases. Okay, and then it goes up a little bit. Okay, and then over here I'm going to do the same, but I'm probably going to concentrate more on just the back of that. Okay, so that's my next layer, and I'm hoping that everything stays nice and wet. So if it's not staying wet, you'll know, because when you put one of these marks down, it will start to show a harder edge, and when we're doing clouds, we certainly do not want that to happen. Okay, so if you need to, you can spray it. I don't need to spray it at this point. So now I'm going to mix a tiny bit more of the dark, go a little bit darker. Okay, so I'm adding my neutral tint, my Anthraquinine blue. I'm going to add some of that Imperial Purple. So this is going to be quite a bit darker than it was before. And I find it's good to just do kind of roundish shapes. I could probably use a bigger brush too. I can see right now that I'm not using a big enough brush for this. So I'm going to grab a different one, rinse it out. And the trick with using a bigger brush is you need a bigger blob of paint. This brush here needs a fair amount of water as well to keep it working properly. So I'm just going to grab most of the paint that I have here, a bit of lavender, so that I can see whether, yeah, so it's basically the same color. And then this one kind of goes back here a bit more. We got some variety of color through that. And that's all you're really going to do. Now this one we made up, so who knows what's going to happen with this one, but we'll have. And the other thing to note is when the clouds are closer to you and more overhead, you see more of the gray, whereas when they're further away, you see less of the dark parts under the clouds. Okay, go up there, and then over here, we want to keep some of these so that they stick out more. And then as I get down to this horizon, I'm just going to kind of fill in a lot of this. Add a bit more lavender. But leave some of these white marks so it looks like clouds that are kind of far away. All right, this probably needs a bit more in it. Let's put a couple that are higher up. Okay, so that's the basis of our clouds. We covered off these shapes. There's Papa Bear, Mama Bear, Baby Bear, etc. So now we're going to go into the blue of our sky. And we need a fair amount of cobalt blue. I'm losing my paint already. Didn't mix enough. Certainly not for this bigger brush. I might just use this brush. This is a sable brush. So it still goes on nicely. So let's start with where our sky may be. So at the top, I'm mixing a tiny bit of this anthraquinone in. I'm going to go around this cloud. And then I look at the shape that I'm making here. Is it a nice shape for that cloud? Do I want to go in a little bit? Maybe closer to here. And then over to here to this cloud. Maybe I want it to stick out a little bit there. Stick out a bit further there. And now I'm going to add more cobalt and a tiny bit of lavender. Because as I get down here, and if I miss a spot and there's a bit of a cloud looking shape there, that's okay. Okay, a bit more lavender with the cobalt. And this kind of goes off, and then again I'm creating this edge of this cloud. Okay, and then over here I want some more blue sky. I start with the lavender. And then a little bit more cobalt as I go up here. And it's okay if it touches the gray that you have there. That's not an issue. In fact, it's encouraged. So that's pretty much it. Now, what I might want to do though, is I might want to strengthen one or two of these clouds so they look like they stand out more. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to dab with a paper towel. And then when I put on the blue, I can create almost a hard edge. Now it's not quite working the way I wanted it to because I want to do a dry brush effect, and that's hard to do with a sable brush. But let's see if we can do that. So something like that. is creating a bit of a focal point there. Cloud is standing out because it's got a hard edge. Now I don't want a hard edge everywhere on it, but maybe I also want to do that somewhere here. So just a tiny bit. And this edge, I definitely don't want a hard edge there. Created a bit of a interesting edge there. I have to be careful, my paper is starting to dry. The shape maybe should be a little bit weird. Something like that. There, that'd do. And what I would do at this point is I would let it dry. We can come back in and add more shadows to the clouds, but we don't want to mess up the rest of this blue sky. I'll show you one more thing you can do that's always good, but you have to be careful again. It depends on the amount of water you have in your brush. So I'm taking my flat brush, I'm dabbing it off, and then if I want to create, let's say this cloud is wisping out, clean off my brush in the wind and just do that a few places. If you didn't like the edge or you want it to look like it's wisping out, and it creates an interesting effect. We're going to try this painting again, the same one that we did before, but instead of painting the clouds first, we are going to paint the sky. Now the risk with painting the sky first is you end up having no clouds left because the blue has to be applied obviously wet on wet, and by the time you get down to the clouds, that water has, the blue paint has dripped into where your clouds are, and you're not left with much. Try this again. I would say the trick is to have your paper thoroughly soaked before you start, and that means going once or twice, maybe even 3 times on your paper with the water. And I would say maybe start with a 20 or 30% slant. You could go a little bit further. I'm going to go maybe to a 40%. We can tip it back up once it starts going, if it starts to run too much. The other thing you possibly could do is you could just put in kind of a border by taking your Kleenex, like so, and then you've marked out where these clouds are going to be. I'm going to start off with some anthraquinone blue because this is nice and dark. I want a lot of dark at the top of the sky. And then I'm going to go into the cobalt from there. I'm going to go over top of the anthraquinone. Okay, and now I've defined this cloud. It's got a really hard edge there, but I really don't want that hard edge at that spot. So I'm just going to take my synthetic brush and I'm going to soften that out there. And then here, I've also made a hard edge. So I can soften out that part. And it's okay if it runs in a little bit like that, that's all right. And then just continue on with my cobalt. All the way down here. I can dip my head and see where those dry spots are that I created. Go back up into this. I'm not going to worry about that hair. Okay, I think we're coming up to where the dry spots are down here. But I want a nice even coverage here. I don't want to see these pill marks. So I'm going to even tip a little bit further so that I got that coming down. Might put a little bit of cobalt up here just so that everything is blending nicely. Okay. And that's it for that. Okay. I have a bit of a transition there that isn't the greatest, so I might just do my anthraquinone, really touching this lightly with the brush. And then over here, I need more cobalt. So I ran out. Now if I'm going to decide that that should be my focal point, I'm going to make sure this is all nice and wet. Make that cloud go over like that. Okay, then there's another cloud in here somewhere. Okay, so that's not so bad. Now if I want to make this my focal point over here, then I could go a bit into where I'd already dried it out. Maybe a bit in here. Okay, we don't want a focal point on the edge, so I'm just going to take my brush again, kind of soften that out. If I want some parts a bit bigger, maybe I want these guys to join. I don't want a hard edge there. I have a hard edge there, but I'm debating whether I make that my focal point and don't worry about anything else. This one I could make a focal point, but let's just try softening that a little bit here and there. So I'm just taking my synthetic, creating a bit of wisp here and there. Make that a bit higher there, almost touching that part. Okay, and then I've got a hair right in the middle, so I could scrape that hair out. At the same time, I add a cloud. But the hair is not cooperating. There we go. Okay. Something like that is kind of interesting. So now I'm improvising based on what I've got here. I've got a hard edge there, so I might try to almost join these guys and soften out that. Okay. I think it was a bit easier to do it this way. But now we have the issue when we're creating the clouds that everything here will be dry by the time we get to it. The only other thing we can do at this point is wet the bottom here. Add some water on there, which is fine. And then I'm going to put a little bit of distance here. That was a bit of Imperial Purple. Okay, and then take a clean brush. Soften any hard lines you got down there. And then I want to take some lavender and just make some interesting marks. Too dry to do anything else at this point in this area, but maybe a bit of that anthraquinone and Imperial Purple to create some undersides of these clouds. If I do that, and then I come back with my synthetic brush, I might be able to get away with that. But it is very dry. Yeah, it's not so bad. Okay, so we let that dry and then we'll proceed on to the clouds themselves. Okay, so we're going to proceed with the next part of our clouds, and this was the one where we did the sky first, and we tried to have a couple of hard edges here and there, And now we're going to paint the cloud part. First things first, we need to wet down the paper again. And I'm just spraying the front here because this is where the painting has already been painted, so I don't want to put too much pressure on it, but I want to put lots of water on it. So I'm going really lightly. There's not usually a risk that you will lift up the paint that's already there, but it's better to be safe than sorry, so I'm just doing that pretty lightly, whereas when I get to the back here where there is no painting, I can put a little bit more pressure on the paper to get it to straighten out. It's really what I want to do, is get it to straighten out. The other thing I think might be appealing, we'll see, by doing the sky first rather than the clouds, is I can expand the size of the clouds by making the shading better. I cannot expand the white parts though. Clouds, I'm still going to use some cobalt, maybe not as much. I better spray down my paints, I never did. Spray down these wells. I'm going to use some warm colors, so I have my Naples yellow ready to roll. Just put a bit of spray into that one. I have some burnt sienna that was on the palette from before. I don't know if I'm going to use it or not, but may as well have it ready and available. I have some imperial purple. Just wake that up. Okay, and then I have some of the anthraquin in blue. I'm going to wake that up. Okay, and then I have some neutral tint. So that's probably the colors that I will use for this exercise. They're all fairly watery, which I think is going to be okay. And then the other one I might use, which I'll have to add here, is some lavender. I'm just going to have it available in case we need it. So there's not really a huge amount of paint here, and it's pretty watery. If I need to get darker, I can go start at the bottom. I'm just going to use a small brush first because I want the bottom here to be, these are very small shapes at the bottom, and I just want to add those in. I think here there's a lot of dark shapes here and then here, but in between there's some fairly light shapes. Cobalt, and I'm going to take some of the neutral tint, and I'm going to take some of this lavender, and that's going to be my mixture for these dark shapes that seem to kind of go up like this. Looking at the clouds that I have here, and I'm just trying to see if I can put some of that in. And it helps to kind of do this on a bit of an angle. If I'm starting here, making my cloud shapes, and then I go down on an angle, it makes them look like they're going further out in the distance. And then when I get really low, they kind of go like that. So I'm just kind of trying to mimic what that might look like at the very bottom. And then I'm going to switch to maybe a lighter color, maybe a bit more lavender, and do them further back. And the trick here is to leave some of those white spots as well. And when it gets very far back, I'm just going to throw lavender on there. Okay, so that's kind of what we're trying to do with those clouds. And then you can bleed some of these up, like so. So it looks like they're going into the cloud. If you see this situation where you see some white, you can always put some dark up. So here I see some white. I can put some dark up on top of that, and it will make that white stand out a little bit. So I see a bit of white here. I'm putting some dark here. And I'm gonna go have to talk to my washing machine because it's beeping at me. All right, hopefully that did not dry too much while we were putting things in the dryer. The other thing I think that needs is a tiny bit more cobalt in that area. So I'm just going to pick up some cobalt, but then I'm going to make sure my brush is dry by dabbing it off on my cloth. So I see bits of cobalt here and there underneath here. I could probably make that shape there by going up into here. This shape maybe over in here. Wipe off my brush. Okay, and some of these get quite dark and bigger as they go up. Okay, and then back to that mixture that I had. So here I'm going to get a little bit darker. If you find that what's happening is it's going on too hard, your paper may be drying, which you really don't want. And that's quite possible because I had to go put the laundry in. Have a look. It does look fairly good so far, so I'm just going to give it a squirt to keep it wet. Okay. All right, so then over here we want some cloud-like textures. Over here it's going to be quite dark, so I'm going to put that in. And this cloud is closer, so it should overlap the one underneath. Okay, and it'll be quite wet enough as we get into that part there. Just keep bobbing your head up and down and check the wetness of the areas that you're going into. Here I can again bring out some white. This part here is pretty dark. Okay. And this goes right across. Let's make it go across like that. I'm just going to add a bit of dark to that. Okay, and then if I want it to flow up a little bit, I can just put more water up here and it will do that. And this one here, I'm going to have the shape go off that way. A bit more dark. Okay, and then I've got to soften that out so it doesn't look so much like lines. Okay, and we might extend that down a little bit because the bottom of the clouds actually have some depth to them. So we're trying to add that depth. If this looks funny at the top, you can just kind of make it go out. And then here I just want to highlight a bit of white there. So I'm putting in some gray and then I'm moving that gray up. This here is a little bit of an odd shape, but I'm not sure whether we can do anything about it at this point. Something is on my paper here. Oops. Okay, we have a big cloud there. Darken that. And I'm going to get rid of whatever this is here. I have to try and get some warmer colors into here, so I'm going to start just with a little bit of cerulean. Okay, and like that. If the sun's coming from here, the darker parts of the clouds are going to be on the left side. Okay, and then up here, it's completely dry, it seems. Okay, now we need to put some warm color in there, so let's rinse your brush off. Make sure it's completely clean. And I'm going to take some of this yellow, Naples yellow, and wherever I see it the brightest, I'm putting the Naples yellow next to that. And it hopefully will try to help me highlight those spots. And then I'm going to take my synthetic brush and just move that around a little bit. Okay. I don't want to move it necessarily into the white, but I want it to be, I want it to show up. There's that little thing again. Okay, and then I'm going to jump to my purple. Rinse out my brush. This Naples is kind of opaque, so I want to make sure I have a nice clean brush. So this is my Imperial Purple, and it's going to help bridge the gap between the yellow and the darker portions of the cloud. It's all very subtle, but okay. All right, so the yellow really does add a little bit of brightness to that. And then I think I'm going to do a little bit more Imperial Purple in a few areas. It's starting to dry around here. Okay, just to the backs of these clouds. Getting a lot of hairs on my paper today. Okay, take my synthetic brush, wipe out some of these marks that I made. I think that's probably okay for now. The yellow isn't flowing too much, so I'm just going to add a bit of water to help encourage it to blend with its neighbors. And then to add a little bit more warmth to some of these areas, I'm going into that burnt sienna. Okay. And then down at the bottom, as it fades away into the distance, I'm just taking my lavender. And you can actually do the lavender almost straight across at the bottom. If you mix it with a tiny bit of cobalt, it will look like the way in the distance. Maybe the sky is starting to be blue, but it does add some depth. So I think that's about it for that sky. We are going to proceed on to the second sky, which is our wispy sky, this one. And hopefully what you can do is practice these until you feel that you've got some comfort in doing this type of sky. It does take a lot of practice. So thanks for watching, and actually we'll Talk to you later. That's a much smaller mixture compared to my cobalt there, which is fairly generous. And then I've got a darker version with cobalt in it as well. But let's just proceed from there. If I look at this, there's a fair amount of blue up in this area. So I'm taking the darker mixture and I'm just putting that in first. Okay, and there's these dots. I don't want them to look too uniformed, but looks kind of dry over on this side of the painting. So I might give it a little spray there because it looks like it didn't get enough water from the beginning. I want soft edges on this, so I'm making sure that I spray enough on that. And then that's kind of the dark areas, although there is a bit of a dark area here that comes in. Tiny bit of that anthraquinone blue into that. Right there, we got enough of that there. There's a spot in here too. And then there's a few spots that are coming from the edge over here. Again, it doesn't look wet enough. I think I didn't wet it more than once, so it's drying out rather fast here. So I'm just going to try to spray the bottom part as well. And now I want to go a little bit lighter. I'm going to take that cobalt mixture that I had of pure cobalt, and I'm just going to mix it in with that lavender cerulean mix. And down here, there seems to be something that's similar to that shape, although it has a bit of a whisk in the middle of it. Okay, and then the other thing is to show some movement. These clouds are maybe moving towards this way. Okay, and then again, I'm going to add in to that lighter mixture, maybe a bit more cerulean as I go down. Put that in there. Now I'm encountering a lot more water in that area. And then we have this big patch here. And then all of these just kind of flow from the side. And then we have cerulean, a nice stripe along the bottom like so. And that's kind of at the horizon level. And then you can barely see, but there's a bit of cloud formation right at the bottom here. And this appears a little bit bluer down here. Maybe a little bit more cerulean in that area. And that's pretty much it. That's our, to soften any of the areas, just take a synthetic brush. Flat brush is good, but I'll just use this one for now since I don't have flat brush handy. Whoops, and that had some paint on it. So I got a worm streak there. But this way you can kind of break out some of the areas that might have a hard edge. Just soften them up. This might benefit from a wipeout as well. So I did find my brush here. So I need my brush and I need my cloth. And if I want to make this part here a bit more interesting, might be a bit too late because it's not really coming out. But I can kind of make interesting shapes out of that, but don't fuss too much. Or, you know, once you're done this, you're pretty much done this. And that's it. This part looks a little weird. Thank you for watching, everyone, and don't forget to keep practicing these two skies. Your confidence and capabilities will grow, and see you on the next one.